Meir. I'm a special assistant with the executive staff of the Department of Environmental Conservation. I work on pollution prevention and green procurement, and I'm very happy to have here at the table with me three people who I very highly regard and also like very much, some of my favorite people, to talk about product stewardship, which is very much related to what we were talking about earlier on green procurement and driving sustainable manufacturing and things of that nature, sustainable design. So I'm going to actually introduce everyone myself, because I frankly think that people never give themselves enough credit when they introduce themselves. So Risa Domino, directly to my left, is the Director of Legislative Programs at We Recycle, an e-Stewards certified electronics recycler headquartered in Mount Vernon, New York. Among many other projects, prior to being at We Recycle, she was a special assistant in the Commissioner's Policy Office, so she worked with me at DEC. And among many other projects, in her time at DEC, she led efforts to create a statewide solid waste management plan called Beyond Waste, a very famous document within the agency. And she was also part of the team that crafted the New York's very landmark legislation on electronic equipment recycling and reuse, which was enacted in May of 2010, in which in a panel that Risa didn't get to hear yesterday, another recycler praised as one of the best in the country. And I think that the work she's done has been exemplary. That's Risa. Miriam Pai, another old colleague of mine, not old, but long-term colleague of mine.
Yeah, I'm old.
Is a senior project manager of manufacturing technology development at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, where she focuses on industrial productivity and biomimicry. Prior to her 12 years at NYSERDA, she was a research associate at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy in Washington, D.C. And prior to that, something I didn't know about her before, she worked in corporate finance. So we have someone who really does understand these matters. I'm glad you actually told our last speaker that talk about the savings. There are savings. Miriam's lovely and has worked a lot with me on pollution prevention over the years. Peter Pettit is a professional engineer and the director of the Bureau of Waste Reduction and Recycling at the Department of Environmental Conservation, where he's been with the Bureau for 24 years. He is responsible for recycling and composting and other programs. He serves on the board of directors of several state and national organizations. I can't list them all because there's too many of them, but there's a number that are important for today. One is the Toxics and Packaging Clearinghouse, the New York Product Stewardship Council, and the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association, NMOA, which also runs, in which Peter works on the Interstate Mercury Education and Reduction Clearinghouse. So Peter is an expert on chemicals in products, on mercury in products, and on product stewardship and materials management. It's great to have you here. It's great to have you all. Great, and I'm looking forward to it. So we're going to start with Peter, and he's going to start with his talk.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Very good. Do I need this? Yes. Do I need this? Yes. Okay. I need this.
It's being recorded.
Very good. Thank you. That's good to know. Thanks very much, Beth. Appreciate the invitation and the introduction. It's good to be here. I hope I'm an expert in some things, but not everything, but we'll see how it goes. The presentation I'll speak on today is, my part of it is going to be about product stewardship and what DEC and the state has been working on. So let's see if they can do this. Okay, I'll give you a little bit of the background of where we are, talk about some of the product types and why, some of the existing laws, some of the proposals that are under consideration, talk about next step issues, things that we have to do or the state needs to do to try to push these policies forward, who's involved, contact information if you have any future questions that you don't have today. If you need some follow-up, you can contact me. And then I'll give a couple little specifics about the two existing laws that we have in place. Product stewardship. Who here thinks they know what product stewardship is? Anybody? Okay. In reality, there's a number of national organizations that are involved in product stewardship, and they all, at this point in time, pretty much have different types of definitions. What I tried to do is use a definition that is more consistent with overall the organizations involved. I won't read this for you. but it's basically a policy where everybody involved in the life cycle of a product is involved in its management of the product. Okay? Extended producer responsibility, also a terminology that we use for this area, is a central tenet of product stewardship, and it's basically the policy approach where the producer has extended responsibility for managing the product. And its packaging. Let's not forget its packaging. As far as background, product stewardship, it's about waste management. Beth was able to talk a little bit about the solid waste management plan in New York State that Risa spent years of her life working on, as well as a couple of people, other people in this room. Tom Lynch worked on it, as well as Barbara Warren and a few others. We included product stewardship in the solid waste management plan, and it is for the first time included as a policy directive for the state. It's supported by the New York Product Stewardship Council, as well as the New York Recycling Association. I want to talk a little bit about the New York Product Stewardship Council. That was basically formed, in my mind, as a result of the efforts that Risa and staff did and our advisory committee for the Beyond Waste plan on the work that they did when we brought forth the consideration of product stewardship as a policy program for the state. We were able to bring in national experts that gave us information, briefed us about the policy program and what it meant for states, local government, municipalities, retailers, all of that. And with that introduction, with the work that we did on that, several of the state solid waste organizations and recycling groups decided that we should start our own council here in New York State. There are several product stewardship councils now across the country, and basically what it is it involves the local government with advisors to help push forth product stewardship program and policy through the state. I'll get back to the Beyond Waste plan. There's a specific chapter in the Beyond Waste plan, Chapter 5, that outlines what we believe is a vision for product stewardship in New York State. It is posted on our website, and you'll see that at the end. And to the benefit of the department, we actually established a new section within the department to manage product stewardship efforts. That section is within my bureau, and right now they are managing the e-waste and the rechargeable battery laws. There are some other responsibilities that they have, but those two by far keep them busy, and we could use twice as many staff, if not more, to work on implementation of those two programs. Which materials and why? The main materials that we target for product stewardship are ones that are problematic in the waste stream, either because they're high toxicity, they might contain hazards, they're a very large volume of materials, but something that causes problems. The pictures here, that's mercury, you didn't know, and carpeting is two examples there. And here are some more that we've looked at. Beth mentioned I'm involved in mercury products. We have quite a few requirements on mercury-containing products in New York, but we do not have a take-back requirement for it. Carpeting, we all have carpeting pretty much, and we all get rid of carpeting, and it's a lot of material. Pharmaceuticals, I think you've read the papers recently about national collection efforts for pharmaceuticals. Usually ends up in the wastewater or water streams, something we have a problem with. Packaging. Packaging and printed materials take up way more than 30% of the waste stream, large volume material. Paint. Who doesn't have paint in their cellar? Good. Hopefully, at some point in time, there'll be a stewardship program that will manage paint as well. Roofing shingles. They last 30 to 40 years. However, at the end of that point in time, where do they go? Becomes a problem in the waste stream. Phone books. Who wants to get their phone books now? Tom does, yes. A couple of yous. Not so many people anymore. And do you have a choice when you get your phone books? Not really. So there's an awful lot of people that get phone books that don't want them. That's one of the reasons that they're on the list, as well as the volume of material. And smoke detectors. What do you do at the end of life of your smoke detector? throw it in the trash, right?
Don't bring it to an electronics recycling event.
There you go. From one of those electronic recyclers, don't bring it there. No. It's a very problematic waste. Not that there's trillions of them, but there are certainly millions of them. The two existing laws we have in place, the e-waste law, I won't get into too much detail at this point, and the rechargeable battery law. You may have just seen the announcements made, press release announcements, articles, radio, whatever. I actually think we got more press on the rechargeable battery law than we did on the e-waste implementation when it first went out. I don't know why. I'm going to have to try to find that out so that when we have the next one, we have just as much press. We do have other take-back laws, but they're not product stewardship for the most part because manufacturers are not really involved in the process or the policy. Automotive batteries, what do you do with your battery when it's spent? Your automotive battery. Anybody? Trade it in. Trade it in? Well, actually, you pay an extra $5 fee. And if you bring it back, they'll give you the $5 fee. It's an incentive. But the amount of lead that is in it, it's very cost-effective to recycle. So, and please don't throw them in the waste stream or bring them back to electronics collection. Used oil. If you have your used oil changed, the gas station will take it back. Okay? They're required to. Just so you know. Wireless cell phones. We also have the requirement that if a wireless cell phone provider is selling cell phones, he has to take those back as well. Plastic bags, you may all know that we now have plastic bag take-backs in grocery stores and other large retail stores. And sharps. We also have a take-back program for sharps. But as I said, those 5 are in place. Some of those have been in place for over 20 years. But they are not product stewardship. The manufacturer has no part in it. The manufacturer is paying no part of the disposal or management of those items at the end of their life. I used this presentation, or part of this presentation, for a previous conference, and I left the next 2 the way they were. The only reason I did was to try to split up the number of proposed pieces of legislation that we have. The first one I identified here specifically for mercury-containing products, near and dear to my heart. There are basically 5 proposals, 2 for mercury thermostats. Again, product stewardship specific proposals. We do have prohibitions on the sale of certain mercury-containing products. We do have various requirements for labeling, for manufacturers' notifications, for a whole bunch of things on mercury products. But we do not have product take-back by manufacturers. So there's 5 proposals right now in New York State for that. The other 8 proposals, 2 on pharmaceuticals, 1 on paint, yes, great. Batteries, it's kind of questionable whether the battery one is really product stewardship. It's more or less just to have New York City have the ability to have their own program. Smoke detectors, so they don't go back to RISA. Phone books, carpeting, and framework. And what I'll do is, I'm going to ask Tom if he could hand this out. As he's handing that out, let me talk a little bit about the framework. The framework proposal, or at least conceptually, is an attempt to provide a piece of legislation that allows additional products to be added over time, so that you don't need to have a specific proposed piece of legislation for each and every product category. If it's taken us 15 years to get 2 product stewardship proposals in place now, can you imagine how long it's going to take if we were to try to get product stewardship for each and every one of these problematic wastes? The framework idea would be to pass one piece of legislation, have the department or some other entity evaluate what additional products should be added, and then make recommendations. In some states, they've recommended that those recommendations go to the governor, and the governor makes the decision. Our proposal is more on the side of recommending something to the legislature. But trying to do all the footwork ahead of time and make a suggestion so that it's easy just to adopt that additional product stewardship item. The table that Tom handed out gives you a kind of a breakdown on the one side of all of the proposed pieces of legislation involving product stewardship. It also, on the left side, I tried to break down the major provisions. They're not all the same, obviously. But if that general concept is included in there, I tried to provide a check. And on the back side, I think, is the retail side, right, Tom? On the back side of that? Tom? On the back side is the retail list? Yes. Okay, and it also contains the 2 product stewardship laws as well, so you have an idea of what the provisions are in the e-waste as well as the rechargeable battery law. Do you have any questions about that? Or if we can argue about whether the provision covers that, just let me know. Next, well, actually, pending issues, legislative attention. We have received a lot of legislative attention. This is great. It's a really good thing. 13 proposals. Not all of those, of course, have sponsors in both houses. Okay? The other part to that is, it's great to have the attention, but what would happen if we had all, well, say 5 of those adopted in this coming session? Who's going to implement it? Okay? We try to make these as self-implementing as possible when we get, those proposals to look at. But it's still going to require some sort of oversight, and it could take a lot of time and effort, and we don't have the staff to do that. Public education, it all comes with public education or requirements for public education, usually mostly on the product manufacturer. The press information you just received the past couple of days through the articles and radio, whatever, on the battery law, well, think about that. You need to do that each and every time you have a product stewardship proposal. Not only that, you have to provide the continuous education, because not everybody picks it up the first time around, and they might forget about it as well. Regulatory issues, some of them require regulations. We try to stay away from it, but it's likely that there'll be some regulations that'll need to be done in almost all cases. In fact, we do have the authority to move forward on regulations for e-waste and the rechargeable batteries. That's going to be done also out of my bureau. Again, without staff. Staffing, I've said enough. Tracking and database systems, interesting one on the e-waste. The e-waste legislation came with a directive to set up a database program, and we were supposed to have dedicated funding for that. That got swept. So we're trying to scramble to try to find funding to be able to set up that database system to do the tracking that's necessary to make sure the program's being implemented. Next steps. We'll continue to review the proposals. Hopefully, as we learn more with e-waste and the rechargeable batteries, we'll be able to provide additional guidance, direction to some of the newer proposals. We always want to compare with other states. We're a member of, as I said, of many other organizations to try to make sure we're not, starting from scratch on these things. Promoting the programs and additional efforts. These are just some of the organizations involved. The top one, New York State Product Stewardship Council, as I said, was organized specifically in New York for product stewardship. PSI is the National Product Stewardship Institute. They've been very, very helpful in moving product stewardship forward in all of these councils, as well as state legislatures, providing outreach and education. Public Policy Institute, another national organization. EPA, of course, is involved, but they haven't really done anything. They've sponsored some activities, stakeholder groups, meetings and things. Reese has participated in a number of those. They've been helpful of getting information out, but they really have stopped short of being able to really help the issue. Beth mentioned NMOA, Aswamo, IMERC. These are some contact information. Will the presentations be available electronically? Okay, then good. I'll go through this quick. Other than I will mention Thermostat Recycling Corporation. There already is a voluntary program set up by manufacturers of thermostats, mercury-containing thermostats, that will take back mercury-containing thermostats. In fact, household hazardous waste collection programs can now participate in that. I'm trying to go quick. Am I doing okay?
Oh, you know what? I haven't even
Okay.
paying attention. So interested.
A couple of specifics about the e-waste law. I will not read the numbers here, but it gives you an idea of the number of entities that are involved in that. Mark Marukian, who heads up that section, they're on the phone all of the time, trying to provide assistance and education, trying to help the collectives, the recyclers, all through the process. You'll see here we received approximately $270,000 in registration fees. I haven't seen it, but hopefully it's being used well. Here's the timeline of what's next for the e-waste. I think you can read that. Disposal bans go into effect. Certain requirements on reporting come into effect. And then a lot of additional items that aren't on this as we continue to implement the program. It ends up with a disposal ban by all consumers for electronics, or at least the electronics that are covered by this law, by January 1st, 2015. And obviously the reason for that is so that the program is fully in place before the ban goes into effect. Just a little bit about the rechargeable battery law. We've received 6 plans, manufacturer plans. Almost all of the product or of the rechargeable battery manufacturers are in one collection program proposal, the Call to Recycle. Call to Recycle already runs collection program for rechargeable batteries, voluntary, well now mandatory. And they also include cell phones in that program. So.
Okay, Peter, so you need to,
And
you need to wrap up. You've got it.
that's it.
Oh, good.
There you go. Here's the information on the e-waste and rechargeable batteries as well. And it'll be in the electronic copy of the speech. Okay?
Thank you, Peter. I got so engaged in this presentation, I forgot to track the time. So Reese is going to go next. We're going to hold our questions till the end.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here, and those of you who know me know I love to talk about garbage, so I even love to talk about e-waste and product stewardship. So thanks for being here, and thanks to folks for pulling this together. I'm in a different context now than probably last time many of you saw me, working for the private sector. So now I get to talk about why product stewardship is good for business and is good business. I think you heard from my colleague from RCR&R yesterday a little bit about what's happening with the companies in our industry, and I'll try to expand on that a little bit with a bit of a policy approach. So I'll start with just a couple of more points on product stewardship to expand a little bit on what Pete was talking about the business case for product stewardship, and then a little bit about We Recycle and our programs in New York and some of the employment and economic impacts we've seen through product stewardship. So how does it work? In very simple terms, product stewardship policy makes manufacturers or producers of products responsible either financially or physically for managing the product at the end of life. So the manufacturer is responsible to create the collection program to ensure reuse, recycling, and proper disposal. The state government provides some oversight, ensures some accountability. Retailers may be involved, they may not, in some take-back networks, depending on how the program's structured. Consumers, of course, have an important role in any recycling program and in any product stewardship program as well. The two things that you don't see on this slide with any responsibility is local governments. One of the big elements of product stewardship is relieving the burden on local governments of running these types of programs. They can now do it voluntarily through a product stewardship program, but they are often not required. It's not true always, but certainly in the way it's been applied in New York, local governments are not required to participate. What you also don't see in here is a responsibility for companies like mine. We provide the services essentially for the manufacturers. So we are a recycler, and we will recycle, as our name implies, for the private sector, for the public sector, and in any variety of configuration. So product stewardship creates an opportunity for us because it guarantees a level of recycling through these manufacturer-sponsored programs. So it creates an opportunity for us to grow our programs in these areas. So some of the benefits of product stewardship approach is that the person who has the real influence over what the product looks like and therefore how it performs and how it's going to be handled at the end of its life, or how easy it will be to recycle or handle it at the end of its life, the producer, that person has the greatest responsibility for disposal. So it marries those responsibilities in a way that makes sense. It internalizes the end-of-life cost into the cost of the product. So when you buy a computer, you're basically paying for the cost of disposing of that computer at the end of its life, which makes sense on a number of levels. In the long-term, bigger picture, we should be seeing the products that are easy to manage at the end of their life have a lower cost. The products that are greener and perform better should have a lower cost. So it is also an incentive for greener products. Importantly, it shifts the cost from taxpayer, local government kind of relationship to a producer-consumer relationship, again, relieving that unfunded mandate for local governments. So what's the business case for product stewardship? It makes a lot of sense from the public sector perspective, right? Pete has less to manage because it's not a command and control type of regulatory program. The local governments have a better situation because they can either choose not to run a program, or maybe they get paid for or get a free program. But for businesses, it also makes sense, and there's a few key reasons for that. Most importantly is that product stewardship improves the bottom line, and we've seen that in a number of cases where you've got private companies who voluntarily do product stewardship, and often they stumble into it and realize the savings as a result. So for example, Xerox is a great example right here in New York. They reduced 1.5 million pounds of waste per year and annually saved $20 million by implementing essentially a product stewardship program. They lease their copiers, right? So you don't buy a copier usually, you lease a copier, and then at the end of the lease, Xerox winds up with this room full of copiers. Well, they look at it and they realize, wow, that has components that are still useful or might be with a little bit more work. And geez, if we had just designed that easier so we could pull it out and clean it easily, we could use it again and save a bunch of money. So the fact that they have a leasing business led them to having this store of materials there, and then led to thinking, well, if we were a little smarter about design, we could capture the value in that. And in the end, they had these tremendous and significant savings. So the idea with product stewardship policy is that you create a context where that makes sense for everybody. Where you're creating, as David was talking about over lunch, we don't always have the right incentive packages to make it easy for businesses to make the right choices. And so product stewardship is one of those policies that can put those incentives in place to help companies make those smart choices. Also importantly, especially these days, is product stewardship has very little government intervention. It's really a shift from the old approach, the sort of RCRA, clean air, clean water approach of command and control regulation, to more of a market-based approach. In product stewardship programs, generally speaking, you say, hey, here's the goal, industry, you go out and meet it. We're gonna make sure you meet it, and we're gonna have some guidelines, and we're gonna keep an eye and monitor compliance, but you figure out what the easiest way is for you to meet that standard. And so it really is small government, and it's smart government, and it's harnessing the forces of the marketplace to solve some environmental problems. It also levels the playing field. There's a lot of companies out there, as David was saying as well over lunch, you can be the market leader, you can go out there and you can spend the money and be the good performer. Years and years ago, well before there was any product stewardship law, Dell and Hewlett-Packard both did voluntary e-waste take-back programs as a result of a lot of effort with a number of grassroots campaigns. And so they voluntarily instituted these programs, and then they realize, geez, we're absorbing these costs. We're taking back any of our own brand, and there's a cost to that. And, this company over here isn't doing that, and yet we compete for what they call the Walmart price. So we're competing against these folks. We all have to meet the Walmart price, and we have an extra cost. And so over time, they realize, geez, we're all better off if there is some basic policy approach in place that levels the playing field. From our perspective, we recycle. I'll talk a little bit more about our environmental performance. We're a strong environmental performer. There are costs related to that. It's very difficult for us to compete with people who are not operating at that level, and there isn't necessarily regulation in place right now to bring everybody up to our standard. It makes it tough for us to compete. Product stewardship is a way of leveling the playing field. It also helps make businesses green. So, we've talked a lot over the course of the conference about how consumers are getting more and more engaged in buying green, both at the corporate level and at the consumer level. And taking on product stewardship is a way of making your business more sustainable. So now I'm going to transition and talk a little bit about We Recycle. We are a national leader in socially and environmentally responsible electronics recycling, and so what that means is all of these various things. We maximize reuse and recycling. We recover 98% of the materials that come in the door. 1.5% of what comes in the door is actually hazardous components, fluorescent bulbs, batteries, and things that need to be specially managed. And only 0.5% of what we generate actually goes out as waste. And most of that is like the wood from speaker cabinets and the foam from inside keyboards and stuff like that. We really do recover as much as we can. We don't export anything that's not been tested or any whole components. We don't export any hazardous components to non-OECD countries. If we do export any hazardous components, it's only to OECD countries and in compliance with their laws. We are very careful about who we use as our downstream vendors, as we call them, the people who we send our fluorescent bulbs and our batteries and our CRT tubes to, and any market outlet that we use. We audit them. We have very strict selection criteria. We do a paper audit, and then we do an in-face audit, and then we visit periodically to make sure that they stay in compliance and that they're doing what they've told us they're doing. We don't use prison labor, and we don't landfill anything that's hazardous. So we have the eSteward certification. For folks who are not familiar with that, it's a sort of gold standard in environmental certification. The main difference between eSteward and some of the other and the other primary certification out there, the R2 standard, is much tighter restrictions on export under the eSteward standard and a restriction on the use of prison labor. We also have ISO 14001 certification and NAID certification for data destruction. We've done a lot of work in product stewardship states. Maine was the first state to have a product stewardship law, and we've been implementing that program since it started in 2006. In Rhode Island, we're one of 2 vendors in the state program. And in Connecticut, we're one of 6 approved recyclers, and we serve 91 of the 160 some odd towns in Connecticut. We also have very advanced processing in state, so it includes repair, remarketing, and recycling. So this is what our process looks like. We bring materials in from our various customers. Our first step is to go through audit and testing. Does this have reuse value or not? If it does, it goes into a reuse line, or that's where we do data destruction if that's required. The next step is to remove all the hazardous components. All of those hazardous components are then sent to our audited end processors, and that includes any materials of concern, anything with mercury or any other chemicals of concern in it. Then the remainder of those materials, what remains after that stuff is disassembled is all various recyclable commodities. So that goes into our shredding system. We have an automated and proprietary post-shredder separation system, And so what comes out the back end of our facility is clean, very high value, very marketable steel, aluminum, high value metals, light plastic, dark plastic circuit boards. And all of that is sent to materials markets for recycling. So what are we doing in New York? We are registered as a collective e-waste acceptance program under the New York State e-waste law. That means that we implement on behalf of manufacturers their requirements under the law. And so we're developing a statewide collection network, and we're also doing an outreach and education campaign. These are images of some of the posters that we provide to our collection partners to promote their local programs. What we offer, I've talked about most of this and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to just skip over that. We have more than 100 collection sites around the state. We've actually done way more. I should have updated this slide. We've done way more than 30 events in 2011 so far. We're probably over 60 by now. And we have a lot of collection partners. This is just a handful of them. So I want to talk a couple minutes about the employment and economic impact. This is the big picture look at our whole industry. If you look at domestic electronics recyclers, I mentioned before that it's tough for us to compete with what we call the pack and stack export guys, the recyclers who pick up your electronics and they basically put them in a shipping container and send them to China or India to be dismantled and under less than optimal conditions, to say the least. For every job that they create, we create 7. And every pound of material that we handle, we more than double the value of that pound of material. So a pack and stack guy will get 17 cents a pound for his electronics. We'll get somewhere around 38. So the value is really there. We preserve that value locally. We preserve that value domestically, create jobs with that. If you look at just our company and just since product stewardship has come into effect in Connecticut and New York, 2 of our primary markets, we've added 20 jobs to our Connecticut facility, which is does the front end of our process up until the point where the materials of concern are removed. Since that law came into effect in February, we've added 20 jobs. That essentially doubles our production workforce up there. Similarly, in New York, we've added 50 jobs since April 1st, effective date of the law. And, you know, people say jobs through recycling, it's, you know, ugly, it's dirty, who wants those kind of jobs, they're nasty. That's not true at all. There are certainly some material handler jobs that are tough, hard labor, but I have to tell you, I go to those events and I do the tough, hard labor as well. It's pretty well shared across the board. But we also have higher skill positions. We have drivers, we have analysts, we have technicians, we have machine operators, we have machine maintenance people. These are high skill positions and they're growth positions. Every person in our company has a track that they can follow to develop professionally, from material handlers to analysts on up. And we operate under a living wage job system, so everybody in our company, from the lowest grade material handler, is paid a living wage and gets full benefits. I have to say I was astounded when I left state government. I was ready to give up my good benefits package and got the manual and was like, wow, this is pretty impressive. I really didn't give up much. They have a benefits package that is on par with what the state offers. And that's it. So that's me, and hopefully this will be distributed later, and I'll take your questions when we're done.
Okay. Thank you, Risa. And now for Miriam Pye. And we are short on time. I think we must have started late too, and then I'm sorry about that. So sorry, Miriam. Please do your best. Don't rush too much.
Okay. Who's ever heard of biomimicry?
Yeah, that's good. You were good.
Great. I learned about it a few years ago, and I heard Janine Benyus speak. She coined the term biomimicry about 15 years ago. So biomimicry seeks sustainable solutions by emulating nature's genius. I mean, truly, if you think about product stewardship, what is the best product steward that you know of? Well, it's got to be nature, doesn't it? I mean, Because there are no wastes in nature. What we would call the waste from one organism is feedstock for another organism. And nature's had 3.8 billion years to figure this out. And it's not particularly efficient. They do trial and error. And eventually, whatever works is what we have now. It's also important to think about what biomimicry is not. It's not bioutilization. It's not using a natural product. It's not using yeast and beer. It's using how nature does things, not using what nature produces. So there are two different ways that we use biomimicry, and one is that we have perhaps a design problem, and we look to nature to see how we can solve that problem. The other way is we see something in nature, and it's pretty cool, and we think, gee, what can we do with that? Like Velcro. That happened, Velcro was invented because a guy was walking his dog and the dog had burrs on it. But if we look at our own issues and we look to nature to solve them, one example that I like to use is the bullet train in Japan. And the bullet train goes 200 miles an hour, but it had a problem. When it came through a tunnel, it would compress the air in the tunnel, and when it would come out of the tunnel, it would create a sonic boom. Well, the neighbors didn't really like that so much. So the engineers were tasked with fixing it. So the guy who had to fix it actually knew a lot about birds, and he knew that the kingfisher, with its long beak, had the ability to go from one density medium to another pretty seamlessly. You see very little splash there. So he refashioned the nose of the bullet train to look like that of the beak of a kingfisher, which is, now that you know that, it probably looks pretty obvious. That looks like a bird's beak. And not only did he get rid of the sonic boom, but the train goes 10% faster and it is 15% more efficient. So the other way we use biomimicry is we see something in nature and we think, oh, what can we do with that? Well, there is a red seaweed off the coast of Australia that knows how to repel bacteria. The bacteria doesn't land and then get killed, but the seaweed emits a furanone that tells the bacteria, don't land here. So that would be great if we could use that in our hospitals, wouldn't it? And we wouldn't have to use a lot of those nasty cleaners to clean up bacteria. The bacteria wouldn't land on surfaces to begin with. So I'm just going to run through a bunch of examples of biomimicry just because I think that's the most fun. And I think it's the best way to learn about biomimicry. One way to look at biomimicry is looking at the shape of things in nature. And Dr. Frank Fish was on vacation, and he saw a little statue of a whale, and he noticed that on the leading edge of the whale's fin, there were tubercles. So he thought, well, that can't be right because if it should be efficient, it should be smooth, because that's the most efficient surface. Well, not so much. He did a lot of research, and he found out that the ridges actually make the whale's fin more efficient. And now there's a company called Whale Power who's making blades for wind turbines with the bumps on the leading edge. And not only are they stronger, but they're 10% more energy efficient. A few years ago, a company named Novomer came to NYSERDA and said, gee, we want to make plastic using CO2. And I thought, ooh, that just didn't make any sense to me, but if you think about it, that's what plants do. They use CO2 as a feedstock, and that's photosynthesis on the right there. So we helped them. We funded some of their research, and they are now replacing up to 50% of the petroleum feedstock that you would typically find in plastics with CO2. So it's a cheap feedstock. It doesn't make a huge difference in the amount of overall CO2, but it's certainly a useful way to use what we'd normally consider a waste. Columbia Forest Products looked at mussels, and they thought, gee, mussels use a sort of glue that actually works underwater, which is a difficult task in and of itself, and it doesn't use any toxins. And they have used they've developed a soy-based glue that is also formaldehyde-free, and they use that in their boards, so that there are no toxins. Another person in nature that we get some glue ideas from is the gecko. I mean, how does a gecko walk on the ceiling? Well, they have little hairs on their feet, and they can attach to a smooth surface, and if they want to remove their foot, they just turn it at a 30-degree angle, and it comes unglued. So there's a company working on gecko tape. Of course, NYSERDA, we're interested in energy in particular, and there's a company called Regen Energy, and they were courted by California, and they moved from Toronto to California, and they use swarm technology that you see in bees and in ants, particularly in bees. Bees are able to keep their hive within a very tight temperature range. And they do it without any leader saying you do this or you do that. They do it by exchanging signals to each other. So Regen has invented a controller system that mimics this, and you can put it on, like if you're a big company and you have a lot of HVAC units, you put it on your units, and eventually all the units kind of know what the other units are doing and can turn on and off accordingly, so you don't have all your units coming up at one time and going down, and you can save 5 to 10% of your energy bill. There are a lot of universities and companies that are looking at photosynthesis to make better solar cells. And one of these is Sun Catalytics out of MIT, and they are looking at converting the solar energy into storable chemical energy because we need lights at night when there's no sun out. They've actually got a prototype. The solar cell is the size of a playing card, and if you put it in water and add the sunlight, you can actually have enough energy to fuel an American home. Termites are another fascinating creature, and like bees, they have figured out a way to maintain a very narrow temperature range in their home, and that's a termite mound on the left. And what they do is they open and close the vents, and so that the air can flow in or out depending on whether they need to be hotter or colder. And there's a commercial building in Zimbabwe. There's a shopping mall and offices, and they mimicked what the termites do. So they do not have an air conditioning system that uses fuel. This saved them $3.5 million in construction, which was 10% of their construction cost. And the energy use is only 10% of what you typically use, so they can charge less rent. CO2, of course, a big issue, a big problem, and cement companies are known for being big emitters of CO2. And Clara has figured out, they looked at sea coral, and they figured out how to sequester CO2 and calcium to make a limestone skeleton and to make cement. Okay, so my last example, Kalundborg, Denmark. They've got a whole ecosystem going on. So in the middle of it, you see there's a power plant, and the power plant sends waste energy that they use to raise fish, and the fish sludge goes to the farm and is used as a fertilizer in the farm. Another waste of the energy plant is gypsum, and they have a wallboard company So you can see, like, this is just like nature, where one waste is used as a feedstock by another entity. Janine Benyus, as I mentioned earlier, Google her on TED.com, and she's just an amazing speaker, fascinating. Some other good sites to go to are listed here, and there's a searchable database called asknature.org, and you can go there and you can type in, heating problems, and it will show you all the ways that nature addresses heating problems. Just type in anything. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Miriam. Okay. Now I have to earn my keep as a facilitator of all this. We're running at 8 minutes. We're going to have some of this. Where's the red light? Hello? Yep, no.
No, that's.
Just ask questions and have folks responding. Yeah, repeat it a little bit. Oh, okay. You don't have a small. No, it says low battery. It really is not gonna work. It's not gonna work. Yeah.
I'll start up there and I'll change batteries for you.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
Come on.
Go for it.
Come on
Because we're going to be joined by the folks from the other session. Right. Once 2 o'clock comes.
Okay.
It isn't really a novel concept to go to the microphone. They usually do that at a lot of big conferences. But I tried it last week, and people, oh, no, I can't. I wanted to ask, particularly Risa, about, I was very surprised to find out that CRTs, nobody wants them anymore, even though they work perfectly well. I finally gave up my last one that I had in my house for computers and tried to recycle it. Well, they will take it, and even though it's usable, they're just going to recycle it. I mean, there must be millions of those. I mean, what do you do with those?
What we do, we recycle is we take them apart at our facility and we recycle the circuit boards and the metals and the plastics that are in the casings and whatnot. The glass tube itself, we send to a place in Maine where they shave it apart. The back of the funnel is the part that has the lead. The front is just good glass. So they separate the leaded glass from the regular glass, reuse the regular glass for beneficial use, and the leaded glass is sent to a smelter for the lead recovery. So there is some value being extracted. It's an expensive process, and it's of all of the materials in the electronics stream, it's the most difficult and costly for us to manage. But there really isn't much of a reuse market out there. For example, we work with a number of Goodwill sites, and they always try to resell the TVs before they send them to us, and we get a whole lot of TVs from them.
There used to be a glass recycler out in western New York that took it and sent it actually back to
Dunkirk,
the
right?
manufacturer through the X-ray fluorescence process, but since they don't remanufacture them anymore, that failed.
Yep.
Something I should have added was people should tell us who they are. So you're Peter from DASNY. Okay. Anybody? I feel like they hate my dress.
Heather Saunders from NYSERDA. This question is for Peter, although you probably all know the answer. I'm wondering what the hazardous component to smoke detectors is besides the batteries. Is it lead?
Actually, we're worried about the radioactive part of it. Okay.
And is that
That's why
There
we
are-
can't take it.
Right. There are other electronic parts to it, obviously, but it's more problematic with the radioactive parts.
And is that the same for carbon monoxide detectors?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, question up here from Mary.
So what do we do with them?
Some of the smoke detector CO2 manufacturers are starting to look at voluntary take-back. Some of them do, not all, but we would like all of them to do that. And obviously, they're starting the voluntary programs so that we don't adopt mandatory programs.
Yeah, Peter, it's Pete DeRoche, and I was just going to say that the americium that's in most of them is not going to go away anytime soon, so
Correct.
they could actually use it again if they wanted to.
Yes.
That's not what fails.
Right. For us, it's a compliance issue. We're not allowed to accept anything with radioactive materials, so they're a real problem if they wind up in the electronic stream.
I want to mention the issue of plastics as a good product stewardship candidate, particularly the single-use plastics. I know a number of us made that recommendation when we were commenting on the plan, the solid waste plan. It's not only an increasing part of the waste stream, so it creates a problem, and the industry in general is not recovering enough of that material and reusing it. They're using virgin materials. That's one of the problems with the natural gas industry. They want to use the natural gas in the high-value products, which to them are plastics, which then creates this additional burden on our local governments, for handling this waste material. So it's one piece of this life cycle that we're talking about in going to hydraulic fracturing, producing more gas. One of the uses they want to use this gas for is more plastics.
Is that a question, or?
We'll agree.
Yeah. I was when I worked for DEC, was part of a dialogue that EPA convened among a number of state and local stakeholders and consumer product companies around packaging. It wasn't really around packaging stewardship, although that's what all the public sector people wanted it to be about. But there is a lot of conversation happening now, somewhat as a result of that project, but also independently about bringing some of the European and Canadian approaches to managing packaging, including plastics, to the U.S. So, I mean, if I had to look at a crystal ball, I'd say it would be somewhere between 5 and 10 years before you saw legislative activity, but I think it's going to come eventually.
Okay, anyone have a burning desire? One more last question? And then we'll have to...
Pat Golden from New York State Assembly. Peter, you had mentioned the funding issue for the electronics recycling program, and I just was curious, regardless of whether or not your Bureau gets it, as it probably should, for the dedicated funding, is there any estimate at this point how close that's going to come to your actual need to continue the program?
Actually, to the need for the e-waste data program, there was some meetings today actually to try to hash out some of the specifics on how much that would be. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't really know. We'll have to see what the consultants come up with as far as the estimate. Certainly we don't have the in-house resources to be able to make a system that is what we're going to need, because there's an awful lot of data that we need to collect and then analyze. I'm thinking in the $300,000 to $400,000 range. So, and it probably would have been covered with the existing initial registration fees and things of that sort. So, I think they had you guys, I think, had the numbers pretty close. It's just that we didn't get that money. So, but there, as I said, there's other ways we're trying to get to it. So, just not that direct initial fund.
All right, well, we have to end. Thank you very much. Can we have one more round of applause for our panelists?
So we're going to be joined by folks from the other room coming in here, where we're going to basically divide up into groups to have some small discussions about next steps and building a healthy economy.